My name is Vivian Hendricks. I'm 31 years old. And 17 years ago, my mother packed my things into a single duffel bag, handed it to me at the front door, and told me I was no longer welcome in her house. I was 14. I hadn't committed a crime. I hadn't hurt anyone. What I had done was refuse to disappear quietly into the background of my own family. And that, apparently, was unforgivable. Last month, that same woman showed up at my door in Knoxville. Not with an apology. Not with remorse. She showed up with my sister Vanessa standing behind her, and a story so twisted it almost made me laugh. Almost. Because here's the thing about people who spend decades rewriting history. They start to believe their own version. They show up expecting you to believe it too. What happened when I opened that door changed everything. But before I get there, I need to take you all the way back to the beginning. Because this story only makes sense if you understand what was done to me before I was old enough to fight back. And if you've ever been the child in your family who was never quite enough, the one who got the hand-me-downs while your sibling got the brand new everything, the one whose achievements were met with silence while theirs were celebrated like national holidays, then I think you already know exactly what kind of story this is. If that hits close to home, take a second to subscribe and hit the notification bell. I share stories like this every week and I promise you this one is far from over. Now, let me take you back to Knoxville, Tennessee in the spring of 2007. I grew up in a mid-sized house on Callaway Ridge Road in the eastern part of Knoxville, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone and nobody talked about the things that actually mattered. My father, Hector Hendricks, worked as a floor supervisor at a distribution warehouse on the outskirts of town. He was a quiet man. Not gentle quiet, more like the quiet of someone who had long ago decided that keeping the peace was easier than having a spine. Whatever my mother said, Hector nodded. Whatever she decided, Hector accepted. In 20 years of marriage, I'm not sure the man ever had an original opinion about anything that happened inside our house. My mother, Lorraine Hendricks, was a different story entirely. She worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a local construction company, and she ran our household the way a warden runs a facility, with absolute authority and a very clear hierarchy. At the top of that hierarchy was my sister, Vanessa. 2 years older than me, blonde where I was dark-haired, outgoing where I was quiet, and blessed with the particular gift of being exactly what Lorraine had always wanted in a daughter. Vanessa had our mother's laugh. Vanessa had our mother's way of walking into a room and immediately owning it. People always said so. They'd look between us and say, "Oh, Vanessa is just like you, Lorraine, isn't she?" And our mother would smile in that warm, full way she almost never smiled at me. I looked like my father's side of the family. Dark eyes, dark hair, a quieter kind of face. Nobody ever said I looked like Lorraine. And Lorraine never seemed to forget it. The favoritism wasn't loud at first. It was the kind that lives in small things, in the accumulation of 1,000 tiny moments that you don't fully understand until you're old enough to add them all up. Vanessa's school clothes came from the mall. Mine came from the discount bin at a second-hand store 2 towns over. When Vanessa made the cheerleading squad in 7th grade, Lorraine took the whole family out to dinner to celebrate. When I won the regional spelling bee that same year, my mother said, "That's nice, Vivian," and went back to helping Vanessa practice her routines. I told myself it wasn't what it looked like. Kids do that. They construct explanations that protect them from the truth because the truth, that your own mother simply loves your sibling more than she loves you, is too large and too terrible to hold at age 11. By the time I was 13, I had stopped constructing explanations. The evidence was simply too heavy. Vanessa had a savings account opened in her name when she was 7 years old. 8 years of deposits from birthdays, holidays, and what Lorraine called special recognition. Money set aside whenever Vanessa did something our mother deemed worthy. I discovered its existence by accident, overhearing a phone call between Lorraine and her sister, my Aunt Sylvia, who lived in Nashville. Lorraine was talking about Vanessa's future, about the account balance, about plans. I waited until Lorraine was off the phone and asked simply and directly whether I had a savings account too. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has asked a question so obvious it barely deserves an answer. "Vanessa has ambitions," she said. "You'll land on your feet. You always do." I was 13 years old. I didn't even fully understand what she meant. But I understood the feeling it left behind. The specific hollow feeling of being told that your future mattered less than your sister's. What happened the following year was the moment everything broke open. In February of 2008, I applied for a competitive summer journalism program at the University of Tennessee. It was a 4-week residential academy for students who demonstrated exceptional writing ability and critical thinking. I had been writing since I was 8 years old. Short stories, essays, a journal I kept hidden under my mattress because I'd learned early that private things in our house had a way of becoming public ammunition. The program was fully funded by a grant. It would cost our family nothing. I didn't tell anyone I had applied. I had learned not to want things out loud in that house. The acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon in March. Out of over 1,500 applicants across the state of Tennessee, 60 students had been selected. My name was on the list. For about 3 hours I felt like someone had finally looked at me and seen something worth seeing. Then Vanessa came home from school talking about a performance showcase in Atlanta. A 3-day theater workshop her drama teacher had recommended. The cost was just under $900, not including travel. No scholarship. No grant. $900 our family did not have in any obvious excess. That night at dinner, Lorraine announced her solution the way she announced most things. Not as a discussion, but as a conclusion she had already reached in private and was now simply informing us of. Vivian, she said, you'll write to that program and decline. We can't manage 2 things at once, and Vanessa's workshop is a real opportunity for her future. I stared at the table. My journalism program was free. Vanessa's workshop cost $900. The math wasn't complicated and the message underneath the math was even simpler. I set down my fork. No, I said. The word landed in that kitchen like something had shattered. My father stopped chewing. Vanessa looked up from her plate. Lorraine's expression didn't change exactly. It sharpened. Excuse me, she said. That program accepted me, I said. My voice was shaking, but I didn't stop. I applied on my own. I earned that spot. You don't get to take it away so Vanessa can go to a workshop. Lorraine looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something I have never forgotten, not in 17 years, not for a single day. She said, a girl who can't put her family first doesn't deserve to be part of one. I thought she was angry. I thought it would blow over. I had no idea she was already planning. 4 days after that dinner I came home from school to find the front door locked. My key didn't work. I knocked. I knocked again. After several minutes, Lorraine opened the door. She was wearing her good blouse, the one she saved for church and appointments. Behind her in the hallway I could see a single bag, my old green duffel stuffed full. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She looked like someone who had made a difficult but necessary business decision and had already moved past the discomfort of it. I called Sylvia, she said. She's expecting you. There's a bus that leaves at 6. I looked past her into the house. My father was standing at the far end of the hallway near the kitchen doorway. He met my eyes for exactly 1 second, then looked at the floor. From upstairs, I could hear the faint sound of Vanessa's music playing behind her closed bedroom door. Lorraine handed me the duffel. The door closed. I sat on the front steps of that house for 2 hours with my bag between my feet and the late afternoon turning cold around me. I was 14 years old. I had $23 in my jacket pocket, a duffel bag of clothes, and nowhere to go except a bus station 6 blocks away. Aunt Sylvia arrived before the bus ever became necessary. She had gotten in her car the moment Lorraine called her, not to arrange my departure, but because she had heard something in her sister's voice that frightened her, and she had driven the 3 hours from Nashville to Knoxville without stopping. When her blue Subaru pulled up to the curb and she stepped out and saw me sitting on those steps alone, her face did something I had never seen an adult's face do on my behalf before. It broke. She crossed the yard in about 4 steps and wrapped both arms around me without saying anything for a long moment. Then she pulled back, looked at me and said, "You are coming home with me right now, and you are never sitting on a porch like this again as long as I'm alive." I didn't know as we drove north through the Tennessee darkness toward Nashville, that Lorraine had done more than simply lock a door. I didn't know about the document she had signed before Aunt Sylvia arrived. I didn't know what it contained or what it meant. I was just a 14-year-old girl watching the Knoxville skyline disappear in the passenger mirror, trying to understand how a mother decides her child is something she can simply return. It would take 17 years for that decision to come back around. And when it did, it came to my door. Aunt Sylvia's house in Nashville sat on a tree-lined street in the Inglewood neighborhood, a narrow 2-story with a deep front porch and a garden that looked like someone had been tending it with genuine love for about 30 years. Which, it turned out, was exactly the case. Sylvia had lived there since her late 20s, first with her husband Gerald, and then alone after he passed from a stroke in 2003. She had no children of her own. What she had was a spare bedroom with a quilt her grandmother had sewn, a kitchen that smelled permanently of coffee and rosemary, and a particular kind of patience that I had never encountered in an adult before. She didn't overwhelm me with questions that first night. She made soup. She showed me where the towels were kept. She told me the bathroom was mine in the mornings and that she took her coffee at 6 and didn't expect conversation before 7. Then she said goodnight, closed my door and let me fall apart in private. I cried for about 2 hours. Not the kind of crying that feels like release. The kind that feels like your body is trying to process something too large for it to contain. When I finally stopped, I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about my father standing in that hallway. I thought about Vanessa's music playing behind her closed door. I thought about Lorraine handing me the duffel bag like she was returning a library book she'd had too long. By morning something had shifted. I can't explain it exactly. I was still devastated, still frightened, still 14 years old with $23 and a bag of clothes. But underneath all of that, something had gone quiet. The part of me that had spent years trying to earn something from people who had already decided I wasn't worth the effort. Guess, stop trying. Aunt Sylvia drove me to enroll at Inglewood High School that Monday morning. She walked in with me, spoke to the administrative staff like a woman who had every legal right to be there making decisions on my behalf, and introduced herself as my guardian without a single moment of hesitation. I found out later that Lorraine had mailed Sylvia a document 2 days before I arrived. A formal transfer of guardianship signed and notarized, relinquishing all parental responsibility for me to Sylvia and Pruitt. Lorraine hadn't called Sylvia to ask. She had simply signed the papers, stuck them in an envelope and mailed them like a change of address form. Sylvia never told me about that document right away. She told me later, when I was 16, that she had waited because she didn't want me to spend my first year in Nashville feeling like a parcel that had been mailed from one address to another. She wanted me to feel like I lived there because someone wanted me there. She succeeded. Inglewood High was different from my school in Knoxville in ways I hadn't expected. It was larger, louder, more diverse, and the English department ran a school newspaper that published actual investigative pieces. Not just cafeteria menus and sports recaps, but real stories about things happening in the community. I joined the staff 3 weeks after I enrolled. By the end of sophomore year I was the features editor. By senior year I was editor-in-chief, and our paper had won 2 Tennessee Scholastic Press Association awards. Writing had always been the thing that felt most like mine. In Knoxville I'd kept it hidden, tucked away in a journal under a mattress, something private and protective. In Nashville I learned what it felt like to write for people, to put words down on a page and have strangers read them and recognize something true in them. That feeling became the axis around which I organized my entire life. Aunt Sylvia watched all of it with a quiet, steady pride that she expressed not through dramatic declarations but through small, consistent actions. She came to every school event. She read every issue of the newspaper and left them on the kitchen table with her coffee ring on the corner. She framed my first byline and hung it in the hallway next to a photo of her late husband without making a ceremony of it. Just one morning I walked past and it was there. On my 16th birthday she took me to dinner at a restaurant downtown and slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a passbook for a savings account opened in my name. The balance was $3,200. 2 years of deposits she had been making since the week I arrived, birthday money, holiday money, and what she called simply because I felt like it money. I stared at the number and couldn't speak. "You have ambitions," Sylvia said. "And I intend to make sure you have what you need to pursue them." She was using the exact words Lorraine had once used for Vanessa. I don't think it was an accident. I graduated from Inglewood High in June of 2012 as salutatorian. Vanderbilt University offered me a partial academic scholarship to their communications program. Sylvia covered the remaining costs from savings she'd been quietly building for years, and I covered the rest through a combination of work study and a part-time job at a Nashville alt weekly called the Tennessean Independent, where I fact-checked copy on weekends and slowly worked my way into writing short features. College confirmed everything I had suspected about myself and expanded it. I was good at this. Not just competent, genuinely skilled. I had a particular instinct for finding the story inside the story, the real thing underneath the thing people said out loud. My professors noticed it. My editors noticed it. By junior year I had a monthly column and a growing collection of clips that made me feel for the first time in my life like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Aunt Sylvia sent me a card when I got that column. The message inside was 3 sentences. I always knew you had this. Harold would have loved seeing it. Don't stop. I read it approximately 40 times. In 4 years at Vanderbilt, my biological family reached out twice. The first time was in 2013, my freshman year. A text message from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Vanessa's new phone. Said, "Hey, heard you're at Vanderbilt. School." I stared at it for a while and then put my phone face down on my desk and went back to studying. I didn't respond. The second time was in 2015. Lorraine called Aunt Sylvia's landline, not my cell, not my dorm, Sylvia's home number, to mention that Hector had been laid off from the warehouse and things were tight, and she was hoping Sylvia might be willing to help in some small way, given that Sylvia had always had more financial stability than the rest of the family. Sylvia told me about the call that evening. Her jaw was doing the thing it did when she was working very hard to stay composed. "She didn't ask about you," Sylvia said. "Not once. Not your name, not how school was going, not whether you were alive and well. She asked for money." I nodded. I wasn't surprised. I had stopped being surprised by Lorraine years ago. I graduated from Vanderbilt in May of 2016 with a bachelor's in communications, summa cum laude, GPA 3.91. Aunt Sylvia sat in the front row of the audience and cried in the unashamed way she cried at things she felt deeply, which was one of the things I loved most about her. Afterward, she took me to dinner and ordered champagne and gave a toast that made the couple at the next table applaud. Within 3 months of graduation, I had a full-time position at a mid-sized regional media company in Nashville called Meridian Publishing Group. They produced 3 regional lifestyle magazines and a digital news platform covering Tennessee and surrounding states. I started as a staff writer. Within 18 months I was a senior editor. Within 3 years, in 2019, I was managing editor of their digital platform, overseeing a team of 11 journalists and managing an editorial budget of $1.3 million annually. Aunt Sylvia had opened her home to me as a wounded, confused teenager with a duffel bag and no plan. What she had built, without ever announcing it, was a foundation. Steady, deliberate, absolutely unconditional. By 2020, when I turned 27, I was earning more than both of my parents had ever earned combined, managing a team and living in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Nashville that I had furnished slowly and carefully, one piece at a time, the way you furnish a place you intend to stay. Aunt Sylvia sent me an email on my 27th birthday. The subject line was simply, "To my girl. I've been thinking about what to write for weeks," she said in the email, "and I keep coming back to the same thing. I didn't save you. You saved yourself. All I did was make sure nobody locked any more doors. Everything else, every achievement, every milestone, every moment you chose to keep going when you had every reason not to, that was you. I am so extraordinarily proud of you. Happy birthday, Vivian. With all the love I have, Sylvia." I printed that email and kept it in my desk drawer. I still have it. What I didn't know as I sat in my Nashville apartment reading her words and trying not to cry into my birthday takeout, was that somewhere in Knoxville, things were beginning to unravel for Lorraine and Hector in ways they hadn't anticipated. And that Vanessa, the golden daughter, the one who had gotten everything while I got a locked door, was about to discover that being someone's favorite doesn't protect you from your own choices. The knock on my door was still years away, but the conditions that would bring them to it were already being set in motion. And none of them had anything to do with me. In the spring of 2022, Aunt Sylvia started losing weight she hadn't intended to lose. She mentioned it once, casually, the way she mentioned most things that concerned her. Sideways, embedded in a sentence about something else, as if attaching it to ordinary conversation might make it less significant. I noticed because I noticed everything about Sylvia. I had spent 8 years learning her rhythms, her habits, the specific cadence of her voice when something was wrong, but she didn't want to make a fuss. I drove to Nashville from my apartment that weekend and took her to lunch at a place she loved on Gallatin Avenue. Halfway through her soup, she set her spoon down and looked at me with the particular directness she reserved for things that mattered. "I have a scan next Thursday," she said. "The doctor found something he wants to look at more closely." She picked her spoon back up. "The soup is good today, isn't it?" That was Sylvia. Even at the edge of frightening news, she made space for ordinary life to keep going. The scan led to a biopsy. The biopsy led to a diagnosis that landed in the middle of June like a stone through glass. Pancreatic cancer, stage 2, caught earlier than most but still serious, still the kind of word that rearranges everything around it the moment it enters a room. The oncologist at Vanderbilt University Medical Center outlined a treatment plan. Surgery followed by chemotherapy, aggressive with a guarded but genuine outlook if everything went as hoped. I requested a leave of absence from Meridian Publishing Group the following morning. My editor, a methodical woman named Dana Reyes who had hired me 6 years earlier and promoted me twice, approved it without hesitation. "Come back when you're ready," she said. "Your desk will be there." I moved back into Aunt Sylvia's house in Inglewood for the next 14 months. I slept in the same spare bedroom with the same grandmother's quilt, except now I was 29 years old and the circumstances were entirely different. I managed Sylvia's medical appointments, her medications, her insurance paperwork, and the slow negotiation with her body that treatment demanded. Between hospital visits and pharmacy runs and the particular administrative weight of serious illness, I also worked remotely part-time, keeping just enough connection to Meridian to maintain my standing there. Sylvia was not a graceful patient in the way people sometimes imagine. She was not serene or philosophical or gently resigned. She was annoyed. She found the fatigue insulting. She described the chemotherapy side effects with the brisk, impatient language of someone who considered her own body to be behaving badly and expected it to correct itself shortly. That impatience was one of the most comforting things I had ever witnessed. It meant she was still herself. During those 14 months, I learned things about Aunt Sylvia I hadn't known before. I learned that she had been a competitive distance runner in her 20s. I learned that she had once been offered a position in Atlanta that would have changed the entire course of her life, and had turned it down because she didn't want to leave Nashville. I learned that she had kept every newspaper issue from my high school years in a plastic storage bin in the hall closet, labeled in her handwriting with the dates. 17 issues, all of them. I also learned, during one long evening in October when the treatment had left her exhausted but too wired to sleep and we sat together at the kitchen table with tea neither of us was really drinking, the full story of what Lorraine had done in July of 2008. It wasn't just the guardianship transfer, she said. She set her mug down carefully. 2 weeks after you arrived here, Lorraine called me. Not to ask how you were settling in, not to check whether you needed anything. She called to tell me that she and Hector had consulted an attorney and formalized everything. She used that word, formalized. Like discarding her own child was an administrative procedure. I said nothing, waiting. The attorney had drafted a document relinquishing parental rights permanently and completely, Sylvia continued. Lorraine and Hector both signed it. It was filed with Davidson County Family Court. File number 2008, PR 4471. She paused. I didn't tell you when you were 14 because I didn't want you to feel like something that had been thrown away and processed. But you're not 14 anymore and I think you deserve to know the whole truth about what they actually did. I sat with that information for a long time after Sylvia went to bed that night. I had always known, in the way you know things you've never been told directly, that my parents had not fought to get me back. I had not known they had taken formal legal steps to make certain they never could. There is a difference between abandonment and deliberate, documented, permanent erasure. I had experienced the second one. I just hadn't had the paperwork to prove it until now. Sylvia's surgery happened in November of 2022 and went cleanly. By February of 2023 her markers were improving. By May her oncologist used the word remission with the careful optimism of someone who understood that word carried enormous weight and didn't want it mishandled. Sylvia received the news with a brisk nod and then asked whether she could resume her morning walks immediately or whether she needed to wait another 2 weeks. She resumed her morning walks in 2 weeks exactly. I returned to Meridian Publishing Group in June of 2023. Dana Reyes handed me back my desk and then 3 months later, offered me a promotion I had not expected, Director of Editorial Content, overseeing both the print magazines and the digital platform, managing a combined team of 22 with a compensation package that made me sit very still in her office for a moment before responding. I accepted. By early 2024, Meridian's digital platform had grown its monthly readership by 31% under my oversight. We had launched 2 new content verticals, formed a partnership with a regional public radio station in Chattanooga, and won a Tennessee Press Association award for a long-form investigative series I had edited on housing displacement in rural communities. I was 30 years old. I had built something real, not inherited, not handed to me, not the result of anyone's favoritism. Every single piece of it was mine. Aunt Sylvia emailed me a photo of the award announcement the morning it published. Underneath the screenshot she had typed 3 words. Told you so. I was still smiling at my phone when I noticed the voicemail. I had missed a call while my ringer was off during a morning editorial meeting. Unknown number, Tennessee area code but not Nashville. A Knoxville prefix. I almost deleted it. Something made me press play instead. The voice on the voicemail was Vanessa. She sounded different than I remembered. Older, obviously, but also more careful, like someone who had rehearsed a phone call several times before making it and was still not entirely confident in the script. Hey Vivian. It's Vanessa. I know this is out of nowhere. I was hoping we could talk. Things have been really hard and I thought maybe we could catch up. Call me back if you want. She left a number. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then I called Aunt Sylvia. Vanessa left me a message, I said. He wants to talk. Sylvia was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? I don't know yet. What do you think she wants? Sylvia made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. I think you already know what she wants, sweetheart. The question is whether you're willing to find out on your terms. I sat on that voicemail for 11 days. I didn't call back. On the 12th day, a letter arrived at my apartment. Physical mail, handwritten envelope, Knoxville return address. Not Vanessa's handwriting. I recognized Lorraine's precise, angular script immediately, even after 17 years. I put the envelope on my kitchen counter and looked at it for 2 days before opening it. The letter was 1 page front and back, written in the same controlled hand I remembered from grocery lists and permission slips, and the note she had once sent to my 5th grade teacher explaining that I had missed school due to a family obligation, when the truth was she had simply forgotten to wake me up. Lorraine had always written as though she was composing something for posterity. Formal sentences, careful word choices, the language of someone managing their own image on paper. The letter said several things. It said that she had been thinking about the past a great deal lately. It said that life had presented some significant challenges and that she had found herself reflecting on choices she had made when we were all younger. It said that family was important, that blood didn't disappear just because time passed, that she hoped I had found peace and success in my life and that perhaps it was not too late for some kind of conversation. It did not say I'm sorry. It did not name a single specific thing she had done. It did not mention the duffel bag or the locked door, or the document filed with Davidson County Family Court under number 2008 PR 4471. It mentioned toward the bottom of the second page that Hector's health had not been good and that things financially had become quite complicated, and that she would be grateful to know I was open to reconnecting. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope and placed it in my desk drawer next to Sylvia's birthday email. Then I called my attorney. Not because I was planning anything dramatic, but because I had lived long enough to understand that when Lorraine Hendricks put careful words on paper, there was always something underneath them that the careful words were designed to obscure. And whatever was coming next, I intended to face it with full information and absolutely no surprises. The knock on my door was 3 weeks away, and I was going to be ready for it. The knock came on a Saturday morning in March of 2024 at 10:47. I know the exact time because I had been sitting at my kitchen table with coffee and my laptop, editing a piece about small business recovery in rural Tennessee, and I glanced at the clock when I heard it. The particular knock of someone who has rehearsed even that, measured and deliberate, not too loud, calibrated to sound reasonable. I had spoken to my attorney Renata Colby, twice in the 3 weeks since Lorraine's letter arrived. Renata was a compact, precise woman who had built her practice in Nashville on family law and estate disputes, and who had a gift for anticipating exactly how people behaved when money and desperation intersected. She had reviewed Lorraine's letter, listened to my history, and then laid out 3 things I needed to understand before I had any contact with my biological family. First, the parental rights termination filed in 2008 was permanent and irrevocable under Tennessee law. Lorraine and Hector had no legal standing as parents, and no court would restore that standing regardless of circumstance or sentiment. Second, if they attempted to make any claim against Aunt Sylvia's estate, Sylvia was still alive, but the point was relevant. That document would be the first thing on the table. Third, Renata said if they show up in person, you are under no obligation to let them in. You are under no obligation to speak to them at all. Whatever you decide it for yourself, not out of guilt. I had thought about that third point for 3 weeks. I had turned it over the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath. And what I found when I was honest with myself was that I did want to open the door. Not because I had softened toward Lorraine. Not because I was hoping for a reconciliation that would somehow rewrite the past 17 years. I wanted to open it because I was 31 years old and completely unafraid of her, and I thought it was time she understood that. I set my coffee down and went to the door. Lorraine was standing on my front step in a gray wool coat I didn't recognize, her hair shorter than I remembered, more silver threaded through it now. She looked like a woman who had dressed carefully for this visit. The coat was pressed, the shoes were polished, the pearl earrings were the same ones she had worn to church when I was a child. Behind her, one step back and slightly to the left, stood Vanessa. Vanessa looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the drive from Knoxville. She was 33 years old and she looked older than that. Not dramatically, not cruelly, but in the way that specific kinds of stress age a face. She was thinner than I remembered, her shoulders carrying a tension that didn't release even when she caught my eye. For a moment none of us said anything. Lorraine looked at me the way someone looks at a room they once lived in and haven't seen in years. Taking inventory, recalibrating, searching for something familiar to anchor themselves to. "Vivian," she said. Her voice was careful. "You look well." "Lorraine," I said. I kept my hand on the doorframe. Not blocking the entrance exactly, but not opening it wider either. She offered a small, rehearsed smile. "We were hoping we could come in. Just to talk. It's been a long time." I looked at Vanessa. Vanessa was looking at the ground just to the left of my feet. There was something in her posture that wasn't quite shame and wasn't quite guilt. Something more complicated and more tired than either of those things. I stepped back and held the door open. They came in and I directed them to the living room. I didn't offer coffee. I sat in the armchair across from the sofa where they settled and waited. I had learned years ago from watching Aunt Sylvia navigate difficult conversations, that the person who speaks first in a tense room almost always reveals more than they intend to. I had no intention of speaking first. Lorraine looked around my apartment with an expression that was trying to be neutral and wasn't quite managing it. She registered the bookshelves, the framed award on the wall, the general evidence of a life that was ordered and deliberate and entirely self-made. Something moved across her face that I couldn't name precisely, not admiration, not regret, but something more complicated than either, the expression of a person confronting a reality that didn't match the story they had been telling themselves. She folded her hands in her lap and began. She said that she and Hector had been going through a difficult period. His heart, 2 procedures in 18 months, mounting medical costs, savings gone. The house on Callaway Ridge Road refinanced twice, payments behind. She delivered all of it in that measured tone she had always used when performing dignity over disaster. I listened without interrupting. Then she reached the part she had been building toward. Vanessa was also struggling. A divorce finalized the previous year, 2 young children, a job that didn't cover childcare and rent simultaneously. As a family they had been trying to carry it together and couldn't. She had read about Meridian's growth in a Tennessee business journal. She knew I had done well. She was asking whether there was anything I might be willing to extend given the circumstances. She said my family. I let the words sit in the room for a moment. Then I said, "I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. You'd like financial assistance." Lorraine's composure shifted slightly. "Not help exactly," she said. "More like a conversation about what might be possible. We're not asking for a handout. We're asking you to consider, given that we're family. You terminated your parental rights in July of 2008, I said. The document is on file with Davidson County Family Court. File number 2008, PR 4471. You signed it. Hector signed it. It was notarized and filed within 2 weeks of sending me to Nashville with a duffel bag." The room went very quiet. Lorraine's composure didn't break. I'll give her that. But it changed. The careful architecture of the performance shifted like a building that has absorbed a structural shock and is still standing but is no longer quite plumb. Her hands, still folded in her lap, tightened. "That was a long time ago," she said. "We were in a difficult situation. We made decisions that weren't. You formalized it," I said. "That was the word you used, apparently. You told Sylvia you had formalized everything. Like it was a business transaction." Vanessa made a small sound. She had been sitting silently since we came in, and what escaped her wasn't a word exactly, more like something slipping out before she could stop it. I looked at her. She was staring at her own hands. Lorraine pressed forward. "Vivian, I understand you're angry. I understand there are things from the past that were painful. But we are talking about now, your father's health and your sister's children and a family that needs." I'm not your family, I said. Not legally. Not since you made it legal that I wasn't. You don't get to revoke a document when it's convenient and invoke it when it isn't. Lorraine opened her mouth. Kept going. You didn't call Sylvia to ask how I was doing in school. You called her once in 17 years to ask for money. Then you sent me a letter last month that mentioned Hector's health 3 paragraphs before it mentioned anything resembling an apology. Except there was no apology. Not a single specific acknowledgement of anything you actually did. You wrote around it the way you always wrote around things in careful sentences that said nothing. Vanessa's head came up. Something in her expression had changed. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it something sharper had surfaced. He's right, Vanessa said. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Lorraine turned to look at her. Vanessa. She's right, Vanessa said again, more steadily this time. She looked at me directly. What happened to you is wrong. I knew it was wrong when I was 16 and I didn't say so. I've known it every year since and I still didn't say so. I'm saying it now. Lorraine's composure fractured visibly. Vanessa, we discussed what you wanted to say, Vanessa said. Her voice was quiet, but it had the quality of a voice that has finally stopped managing itself. I came here because I thought it was the right thing to do. But I didn't come here to watch you ask her for money without acknowledging what we did to her. I looked at my sister. This woman I had not had a real conversation with in 17 years, who had stood behind Lorraine on my front step like a supporting cast member in someone else's production, and I saw something I had not expected. Not the golden daughter. Not the favored one. Just a tired 33-year-old woman who had spent her whole life inside the story Lorraine had written and was, possibly for the first time, stepping outside it. Lorraine stood. She smoothed her coat with both hands, the gesture of someone reassembling themselves. This is clearly not the right time, she said. I can see you need more time to process. I stood as well. You can take whatever expectation you arrived with, I said. I wish Hector well with his health, I mean that sincerely. But I don't owe you anything. Not money, not access, not forgiveness offered on a timeline that suits you. Lorraine looked at me for a long moment. Then she walked past me toward the door without another word. Vanessa stood slowly. She looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for. Somewhere between relief and grief and something that might eventually become honesty. She followed Lorraine to the door without another word. I watched them walk down the path to the car. Lorraine didn't look back. Vanessa did once. A brief glance over her shoulder before she got in and the car pulled away. I closed the door and stood in the quiet of my own apartment, in the life I had built entirely without them. Then I went back to my kitchen table and picked up my coffee. It had gone cold. I didn't mind at all. 3 days after Lorraine and Vanessa left my apartment, I received a text from a number I didn't have saved. It was 4 sentences long. It said, I know you have no reason to trust me. I'm not coming back with Mom. I'd like to talk to you alone if you're ever open to it. No agenda. Just me. I stared at it for a while. Then I saved the number under Vanessa, sister ? And put my phone face down on my desk. I didn't respond for 6 days. On the 7th day I typed back 2 words. Coffee. Saturday. She replied within 4 minutes with a single thumbs up. I sent her the name of a place in East Nashville I liked. A small corner cafe on Woodland Street where the tables were far enough apart that a conversation could stay private. I arrived 10 minutes early. I chose a seat with my back to the wall and a clear view of the door, which I recognized as the habit of someone who had spent years making sure they always knew the exits. Some instincts don't fully leave you even after you've stopped needing them. Vanessa walked in at exactly 10 o'clock. She was dressed differently than she had been at my apartment. No performance in it this time, just jeans and a jacket, hair pulled back, no jewelry. She looked around, spotted me, and crossed the room with the slightly careful walk of someone who isn't sure of their welcome and is trying not to presume one. She sat down. She ordered a coffee when the server came. Then she looked at me and said, I don't know where to start. Start wherever is true, I said. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I've spent a lot of years telling myself that what happened to you wasn't my fault because I was 16 and there was nothing I could have done. And some of that is even true. But it's not the whole truth, and I think I've known that for a long time. I didn't say anything. I let her keep going. I could have told Mom she was wrong, she said. Not just that once, but all the times before it. The birthday parties. The savings account. Every time she treated you like you were less than me. I saw all of it. I benefited from all of it. And I told myself it wasn't my responsibility to fix it because I was a kid too. But at some point I wasn't a kid anymore and I still didn't say anything. I just kept not saying it. She set her mug down. The thing is, she continued, I've been living with the consequences of who Mom is for the past few years in a way I didn't when I was younger. My marriage fell apart partly because of patterns I learned in that house. The way I was taught to manage people instead of being honest with them, the way I learned to perform whatever version of myself got the best response. My therapist has had a lot to say about it. She paused and almost smiled. A lot. I watched her across the table and tried to locate what I was feeling. Not warmth, not yet. Too much had passed for that to be the first thing available. But something was there. Recognition maybe. The kind that comes when someone tells you a truth that costs them something to say. I asked her a question I had carried for 17 years. That night on the porch I said, you were in your room. I could hear your music. She looked at me steadily and didn't flinch from it. Yes. I waited 4 hours, I said. I was 14. It was getting dark and cold and nobody turned the porch light on. Vanessa's jaw tightened. I know. I watched from the window for a while. Then I couldn't watch anymore, so I just sat on my bed with my headphones in and tried not to think about it. She stopped. That's not an excuse. I know that's not an excuse. I just want you to know that I knew what was happening was wrong even then. I just didn't have the courage to do anything about it. I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked the question underneath the question. Did you know about the document? The parental rights termination? Vanessa shook her head. Not until recently. About a year ago I found a folder in Mom's things when I was helping her organize paperwork. I saw the filing stamp, the court number. When I understood what it was, I confronted her about it. She said it had been the practical thing to do at the time, that Sylvia was going to take care of you anyway and it was just making things official. She said it like it was nothing. Like it was a utility bill she'd sorted out. Something cold moved through me. Not surprise, I had long ago stopped being surprised by Lorraine's capacity to reduce things, but a fresh and specific recognition of exactly what kind of person she was. Did she understand that she was describing giving her child away, I said. Not quite a question. More a statement I needed to say out loud. I don't think she experiences it that way, Vanessa said quietly. I genuinely don't think she does. I think she has always believed that whatever she decided was correct by definition. And any damage that resulted was someone else's fault or someone else's weakness. She looked at her coffee. Living with that belief system is one thing when you're the favorite. It's something else entirely when you grow up and start to see what it actually cost everyone around you. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, Woodland Street was doing its ordinary Saturday thing. Dogs, strollers, the normal world moving around, two estranged sisters trying to figure out what, if anything, they still were to each other. I asked her about her kids. She told me about them. A boy named Caleb, 7 years old, serious and bookish. A girl named Iris, 5, who had apparently decided that her primary purpose on Earth was to climb everything climbable. As Vanessa talked about them, something in her face changed, loosened. The exhaustion still there, but underneath it something genuine surfacing. The real thing beneath all the performance and the history and the weight of the morning. I told her about my work. Not the resume version, but the actual version. What it felt like to edit a story that mattered and watch it land. She listened with the attention of someone genuinely interested rather than waiting for her turn. At some point the server came by and we both ordered more coffee without discussing it. That small unconscious agreement, to stay longer, to keep talking, felt like something. I want to ask you something, I said eventually. And I need you to answer it honestly, not the way you think I want to hear it. She nodded. Was any part of coming to my apartment with Lorraine about the money? She didn't look away. She said, not entirely. I did want to see you, I did want to say what I said. But I also knew why Mom wanted to come and I agreed to go. And part of why I agreed was that I'm genuinely scared right now. The divorce, the kids, the money situation. Part of me thought maybe. She stopped. It doesn't matter what I thought. I shouldn't have used a real thing as cover for a financial ask. That was wrong. I appreciated the honesty more than any version of the conversation where she had denied it. I'm not going to give Lorraine money, I said. I want to be clear about that. Not because I want her to suffer, I don't. But because there are no circumstances under which handing Lorraine money leads to a good outcome for anyone, including Lorraine. Vanessa nodded slowly. I know. I think I knew that before we came. I looked at her. You and I are a different question, I said. I'm not saying I'm ready for a relationship, or that 17 years dissolve because you said the right things over coffee. But I'm not saying no either. My terms include honesty over performance, always. Every time. She met my eyes. I can do that. I told her what I had learned to want from the people around me. Not people who managed me or performed for me, but people who showed up consistently and told the truth even when it cost them. Aunt Sylvia had taught me what that looked like. I had stopped accepting anything less. Vanessa listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "That sounds like a woman worth knowing." "Your aunt." "He is," I said. "He really is." We left the cafe at noon, 2 hours after we'd arrived. On the sidewalk outside, Vanessa paused and looked at me with that same expression she'd worn at my apartment doorway, the one I still didn't have an exact name for. She said, "Thank you for showing up today. I know you didn't have to." "I showed up for myself," I said. "But I'm glad you were honest." She nodded. We didn't hug. We weren't there yet. But as I walked back to my car, I noticed something. The particular quality of the air after a window has been opened in a room that has been closed for a long time. Not warmth yet. Not resolution. Just the beginning of something that might, with enough honesty and enough time, eventually become real. I called Aunt Sylvia on the drive home. She answered on the second ring the way she always did, like she had been expecting me. "How did it go?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. "Honestly," I said. It went honestly. Sylvia made a small sound I recognized as the specific satisfaction of someone who has watched a person they love handle a hard thing well. "Good," she said. "That's the only way anything real ever gets started." I drove home through the Saturday streets of Nashville thinking about what gets started when the ground finally stops being frozen. I didn't know yet what Vanessa and I would become. But for the first time in 17 years I was the one deciding. Not Lorraine. Not history. Not fear. Me. March in Nashville arrives differently than it does anywhere else I've lived. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly replaces the gray with something warmer, edges the bare branches with the first suggestions of green, and fills the morning air with the particular smell of wet earth that means the long part of winter is finally done. I've lived here long enough now to recognize that shift when it comes. This year, on the morning of March 8, 2025, I noticed it through the window of a conference room on the 4th floor of Meridian Publishing Group's offices on Charlotte Avenue, right in the middle of a meeting I was running, and I thought, quietly, privately, without saying it to anyone in the room, that it had been exactly 1 year. 1 year since the knock at the door. 1 year since Lorraine stood on my front step in her pressed gray coat with her pearl earrings and her rehearsed composure, and I opened the door for the last time I ever intend to open it for her. I want to tell you what the year looked like. Not the dramatic parts. Those were already behind me. The parts that came after, which were quieter and in some ways more significant, because they were about what I chose to build rather than what I chose to refuse. At Meridian, the year had been one of the strongest in the company's recent history. Our digital platform closed out 2024 with a 38% increase in monthly readership. We launched a long-form audio series in the fall that outperformed every projection Dana Reyes had put on the table. And by February we had been approached by 2 larger regional media groups about potential partnership arrangements. I had spent the year doing the work I loved with people I respected, and I had learned, finally, fully, not to qualify that sentence with anything. Not with but or except or despite everything. Just that sentence standing on its own. Aunt Sylvia remained in remission. Her 1-year post-remission scan in November had come back clean, and her oncologist had used the word encouraging with the cautious satisfaction of someone who understood the weight of it. She had resumed her morning walks, her gardening, and her habit of sending me photographs of things she found interesting. A striking cloud formation over Inglewood, a vintage bookshop sign she'd spotted on a drive, the garden in various stages of its seasonal changes. I had a folder on my phone containing 47 of these photographs. I added to it regularly. In January, Sylvia and I established the Pruitt Hendricks Scholarship Fund through a partnership with the University of Tennessee's journalism program, named for both of us her name first, which she argued about briefly and unsuccessfully. The fund provided full tuition coverage for the Summer Journalism Residential Academy, the same program I had been accepted to at 14 and forced to decline. 5 students from across Tennessee made up the inaugural cohort, each selected on the basis of demonstrated talent and financial need. I attended the opening reception in February. 5 students, ranging from 13 to 17, sitting around a seminar table with their notebooks and their entire futures still open in front of them. I told them that this program had once been offered to a girl who needed it and had been taken away before she could use it, and that this fund existed to make sure that never happened to anyone in this room. I told them to take everything and use it without apology. Afterward, a 16-year-old from Cookville named Amara told me she had almost not applied because she didn't think someone like her would be selected. I told her that was exactly the kind of thinking the fund existed to interrupt. She nodded with the focused seriousness of someone filing information away for later. I recognized that expression. I had worn it myself. Vanessa and I talked every 2 weeks. Not always for long. Sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes closer to an hour, depending on what was happening in each of our lives. The conversations had gradually expanded from careful and surface level to something more genuine, the way a path widens when enough people walk it. She had completed her licensing hours and was now working full-time at a salon in Knoxville that she genuinely seemed to like. Caleb had lost 2 teeth and gained an obsession with dinosaurs. Iris had climbed something she shouldn't have and required 4 stitches on her chin, which Vanessa recounted with the exhausted dark humor of a parent who has accepted that some things cannot be prevented. We had not discussed Lorraine or Hector in any of those calls, by mutual unspoken agreement. Vanessa had told me once briefly that their situation remained difficult, that the house on Callaway Ridge Road had been sold in the autumn and that they were renting somewhere smaller. I had listened and not commented. I had no anger left for them and no room for them either. That was not a contradiction. It was simply the way things had settled. In February, Vanessa had driven to Nashville for a Saturday, and we had met at the same cafe on Woodland Street where we'd had our first honest conversation 11 months earlier. We had stayed for 3 hours. At some point she had shown me photographs of Caleb and Iris on her phone, and I had held the phone and looked at these 2 small people who were technically my niece and nephew and felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not a dramatic rush of family feeling, nothing like that, but a quiet and genuine interest in who they were and who they were going to become. I handed the phone back and told her they both looked like trouble in the best possible way. She laughed, the real kind, the kind I remembered from when we were small and the world had not yet arranged itself around us in the particular way it had. I drove home from that lunch through the February streets of Nashville and called Aunt Sylvia immediately, the way I always did after something that mattered. She was in her garden, she said, doing the first round of pruning before the spring growth started. She put me on speaker so she could keep working while we talked, which was a thing she did and which I had always found quietly charming. The refusal to stop useful activity just because a conversation was happening. I told her about the lunch. She listened with the occasional small sound she made when she was tracking a story carefully. When I finished she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what the bravest thing you've done this year is?" I thought about it. "The scholarship fund," I said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "No," she said. "The bravest thing you've done is let something be complicated without needing it to be resolved. You didn't take Vanessa back fully and you didn't push her away. You held the door open at exactly the width you were ready for. That's not easy. Most people either slam it shut or throw it open. You did neither. That takes real steadiness." I sat with that for a moment, watching the Nashville skyline through my windshield in the gray February light. "I learned it from somewhere," I said. She made that sound again and I could hear the snip of her pruning shears in the background, steady and purposeful, cutting back what no longer served and making room for what was still growing. I know what the story of my life looks like from the outside. Girl gets cast out. Girl rebuilds. Girl refuses to be broken by the people who tried to discard her. There is justice in that arc and I won't pretend there isn't. But that's not the part that matters most to me. The part that matters is smaller and quieter than that. It's a spare bedroom with a grandmother's quilt. It's a framed byline hanging in a hallway without ceremony. It's a savings account opened in secret for a child who had been told her ambitions weren't worth planning for. It's a woman in a garden on the phone, pruning shears in hand, who once drove 3 hours through the night to make sure a 14-year-old girl never had to sit on a porch in the dark again. That is what saved me. Not justice. Not the document filed with Davidson County Family Court. Not the career or the title or the scholarship fund or any of it. Someone who chose me when they didn't have to. And the long, steady work of learning to believe I was worth choosing. That is the whole story. And it is finally, completely mine. If this story made you feel something, don't just scroll away. There are so many stories out there that never get told, and here on Confira Stories we bring them to life. So if you enjoy emotional, real-life drama like this, take a second to subscribe and be part of the journey. And if you've ever been in a situation like this, or have a story of your own, share it in the comments. I read them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.